Good day, I'm Teresa Fredericks from Growing Businesses Using Projects, and today I'm going to be discussing with you 7 questions to answer before even starting up MS Project 2016 to prepare your project schedule. So what are we going to discuss today? We're going to be looking at the reasons why you need to properly plan all aspects of your project that are necessary for the scheduling. We're going to look at questions that you need to answer before starting up MS Project 2016. We're going to dive a little into project scope management, and we're going to be looking at the critical area of requirements process. Before we go further, I want to talk to you about the critical area of project scope management. Scope refers to all the work involved in creating the products of the projects and the processes used to create them, including requirements. So as we are about to delve into doing our schedule, what I'm suggesting is that one of the reasons we need to stop and go back to planning is to make sure that we have everything in the project that we need to have in the project. You're looking at the products or services, but you're also looking at the processes used. What do I have to get? What other requirements do I have to settle? And we're going to be looking at requirements a little later on. What we are producing in the project is something called a deliverable. This is a product produced as part of the project, such as hardware or software, planning documents, or meeting minutes. These are deliverables. But when we're talking about the scope, we are looking at 2 aspects of it. We are looking at the project scope and we are looking at the product scope. And both of them will have a heavy influence on the final schedule that we are working out. The project scope is the work needed to be accomplished to deliver a product, service, or result within the specified features and functions. So what is a result, you may say? You understand product. A product, you make something. A service, you deliver something. But many of our projects, the results are documents. They are research type projects. All right, so that you want to find out why a certain thing is happening in a particular area. You may hire a consultant, and on the basis of these findings, now you are able to determine policy with respect to the particular area. So those projects make up a substantial part of our package of projects. The results that inform policy. And this project scope is measured against the project plan, scope statement, and WBS. Don't be afraid, in later videos I will delve much more into this. All I'm saying to you is before you start going into do a schedule, you have to make sure everything that is required for this project is in the project. So what is the product scope? This is the features and functions that characterize a product, service, or result. And that is measured against the requirements for the product, service, or result. So that you are buying a computer, but you need to have certain capabilities in it. So that is the product scope. But the project scope is very important. For instance, if you are building a house, there may be certain legal requirements that you have to meet. So that what we are saying is those 2 comprise the scope, and you have to pay attention to them. So before you go into scheduling, you have to revisit scope. So I spoke to you about revisiting the scope baseline. The scope baseline is 3 things. The definition of the scope, something called the WBS, where you break the scope down into smaller parts. You're building a house, a foundation might be one of the parts, the roof might be one, so you're breaking it down. Because remember, in MS Project, you're trying to come up with time frame, with durations and all of those things. So you have to have the small parts that are broken down into sub-deliverables, and in something which we call defined activities, which again is another area we'll cover later on. You break the lowest level of the WBS into activities. Now, some of the things you have to also look at is, have we excluded what should be excluded from the scope? You don't want to go and plan for things in your project that is going to take time and money and resources and that are not necessary. And it is important to write down these exclusions, and we will discuss that later on also. What about requirements? What are requirements, and have all the requirements been noted? And I always tell my students that government has an input as a stakeholder in almost every project, so that there will be legal requirements that you have to adhere to. Have these been noted? Have you constructed the WBS properly? Are all deliverables included? And what about issues and assumptions and risks? Have they been taken into consideration? At this point, really, you're revisiting your project plan to firm up certain areas. Why? Poor planning and poorly conceived schedules are major causes of project failure. And often when you delve into why the project failed, is because certain requirements have been left out. So you need to ensure that all important aspects have been properly planned for. I've been talking about requirements, and you may be saying, what are the requirements? But there are several requirements. One is the condition or capabilities that should be in the product or service. What features and functions and characteristics do we want in our product? Then we have the quantified and documented needs and expectations of the sponsor, customer, and other stakeholders. What have the key stakeholders said should be in this project? Is it in? What about business requirements? The higher level needs of the organization, why the project is being undertaken. We tend to focus a lot on what is the deliverable of the project, which is the main thing coming out. The Ministry of Education built a school, and the school is the deliverable. But why are they building the school? The objective is for education, so that some projects fail because the project is completed, but the business objective is not adhered to. So we have to keep our eye on the business objective. So as we're reviewing before we get into doing the MS project, have we looked at that area? Are the business requirements, have they been taken into consideration, and what is necessary for the success of these requirements, and are they in the project? Then there's transition requirements. If you're doing IT project, you may have data conversion and training requirements. As a matter of fact, I always say, anytime you're introducing something new into an organization, ask if there should be training. What training should be there? Because even the training program is going to add to the schedule. What about project requirements? Conditions the project need to meet. And it could be at the simplest level. If you are, for instance, if you are working in a school, there may be certain requirements, especially if it is during the school term. So what are the project requirements? If some people may have specific ways they do things like procurement and all those kind of things, the project has to adhere to it. There may be internal rules about how the work is managed, especially if the project is being handled by an organization, and that organization has specific rules in terms of projects. If an organization is a projectized organization, is going to be even more specific. What about capabilities the stakeholders would like to see in the product? If you're doing an ATM machine, there are several things you want to have that capability. Several people could be accessing it at the same time, or accessing the system at the same time, and accessing different banks at the same time. So if you're setting up an ATM network, so these are some of the things that you'll be looking at. What about quality requirements, especially for food and things like that? Business processes, are we adhering to that? And what about any project management type requirements that should be taken into consideration at this point? So this whole video is about questions, and I have the 7 questions on the slide right now. One of the first questions is, what needs to be done. That is where we spoke about scope. But the scope is related to the goals, the objectives. So, and the scope is going to give you the deliverables, and defined activity is going to give you the task. Then how long will it take? You have to look at duration and effort. Why are we asking ourselves this? Some people may say, well, I would get that from Microsoft project. But you don't. You have to determine how long these things will be. Microsoft is not going to sit down and tell you it's going to take 3 days to paint a roof, to paint a wall. Microsoft cannot do that. So you have to come up with a whole series of things that you put into the software. The order, you have to determine, okay, if I am digging a hole to pour concrete, I have to dig the hole first and then pour the concrete. And all of that is going to determine how long the project will take. So you have to look at dependencies and relationships. When must it happen? Are there any budgetary constraints? Are there restrictions? What about resources and their availability? What about constraints that impact timing? All right, you may have a deadline to finish this project. So when is it and what do I have to do? Because as we work out the schedule, we may realize that we are going to blow the deadline. So we may have to start cutting back, and we may decide as an organization probably we need to reduce scope. But all of these things have to be worked out by the people who are actually going to be doing the work or managing the project. Who is going to do it? What resources do we have available? When will it happen? We have to put in the start and finish dates, all the deadlines. How much will it cost? Believe it or not, it's in this area Microsoft project can help. Because when you put in costs and you put in your rates and your resources, it can calculate things for you. But you realize that in those first 6, you have to sit down and decide what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you're doing it. And I always suggest that you use a team approach, because you need the team, especially when it comes down to activities. The people who are actually going to do the work might be able to tell you you're missing some certain critical steps. And some of those critical steps will actually result in increased time and probably increased cost. So I hope I have helped you to recognize, and we're going to be looking at individually some of the things that you have to prepare. Because when you go into Microsoft project and you start putting tasks, you have to talk about which one is linked to which one and how long, what is the duration, and a lot of things that you have to actually work out in planning. I trust I've been of some help, and just look out for me to really get into some of these other areas, especially scope and requirements, in subsequent videos. If you like my content, please subscribe. One thing I forgot to say is that the software can help you in determining the finish dates, but you're going to have to program it for things like holidays and things like that. But we will get into that a little later on. Bye.